Welcome, and thanks for joining this 30-minute session looking at what's involved in migrating a legacy journal archive into Office 365. My name is Claire Drew, and I'm part of the messaging team here at Essential, and I've been working with customers implementing and latterly migrating email archives for over 11 years now. I'm joined today by Luke Cotton, one of our migration specialists. Today's session is aimed at pulling together some of the recent updates from Microsoft in the Office 365 compliance space to provide you with some options on where you can get further assistance with planning your migration, and to share some useful articles and resources at the end. Recently, Microsoft have improved some of the compliance features within Office 365. So today we'll explore how Office 365 might now be a valid option for organisations looking for a one-stop shop messaging platform and a compliant archiving solution. Essential are vendor neutral, so we move email archives to and from many destinations, including the usual suspects like Enterprise Vault, EAS, Proofpoint, Mimecast, EV Cloud, and many others, as well as into Office 365 and to and from on-premise Exchange. This combined with many years of archiving and migration experience means that we're often called in to help organisations define their requirements for archiving and develop a suitable migration strategy. And we've tried to keep this session short and sweet, but trust me, we can talk for hours on the subject. So if you do have any questions about any of the content today or anything maybe we've not covered, please do get in touch. We'll be happy to help. When customers migrate their email archive into the cloud, one question which has always come up is, well, what do we do with our journal? Until now, the options have primarily been retain it on-premise, either continue archiving with the on-premise archive, and retain the journal on-premise, or depending on business need, decommission or retire the archive. Alternatively, the option has been to move it elsewhere, and typically this has been a third-party cloud, or on some occasions back to Exchange where applicable. Now there is an option to move it into Office 365, and we will explore that further, but let's take a quick look at each option. So we've seen a number of customers keep their journal on-premise, but hugely scaling back their archive environments by shifting some or all user mailboxes and archives into the cloud. Capita is a really good example of this. The business is made up of a number of divisions, a proportion of which relates to their customer activities and their financial and legal arms. So the decision was made to keep their compliant users and journal on-premise for the time being. However, the benefits of Office 365 for non-compliant mailboxes are considerable. So what they've done is they've migrated these users, approximately around half of the total 45,000 mailbox estate, and the last couple of years of their legacy user archives into the cloud. This way the business starts to benefit from the cloud for a proportion of the environment, but maintains control of the data and e-discovery in-house, where there's a bit more sensitivity around where critical data should reside. Alternatively, for some organisations, the archive is actually the cause of some headaches. And so in these cases, the legacy journal could be rehydrated to Exchange for future retention, although you do need to carefully consider storage growth in this scenario. One utility customer we know is doing exactly this. They're scaling up their on-premise Exchange 2013 for journaling, but moving their user accounts into the cloud. Although obviously keeping some data still on site comes with the burden of maintaining the NAT storage and server maintenance and all of that, which for some organisations we know is the driving force behind shifting everything off-premise in the first place. Now the other option we've seen a lot of customers doing is moving the journal to a third-party cloud such as Proofpoint or Mimecast or EV Cloud to sit alongside user mailboxes either on-prem or in Office 365. Here you configure a journal feed from Office 365, or the service will capture all email at the gateway. Often these services do bring additional benefits for things like business continuity, email hygiene, extra features like large file sending, and they do usually have an easy to use search and discovery interface for your legal team. However, it is an additional service to manage and will come with an extra annual subscription cost. You have to arrange for the ingestion of your legacy journal once you've extracted it from your existing archive, and the hosting and management of it going forward may incur a further charge. While your user archives will be migrated to Office 365, your journal archives will be independently migrated into your chosen cloud service. Typically, the migration path will involve extraction from your archive to PST files into sort of a suitable structure, transfer to your cloud service, and then subsequent ingestion into your new cloud archive. So whichever route you take, There are several pools of data, both on-premise and in the cloud, which do need to be managed, and this can cause some overheads. But Office 365 has now become a viable contender for being a one-stop shop for organisations looking to have everything in one place. Your organisation now has the option to use Office 365 as a single repository, as it will now meet the requirement to handle your internal and external policies around email retention and access, in order to capture all email going forward with no sort of real need now for a third-party solution. The in-place hold mechanism in Office 365 will support your email policies, and so you can effectively stop journaling in the traditional sense once you make that switch to Office 365. If you migrate in your legacy journal archive, as well as all or some of the user archives, it means you can now feasibly have a single repository, as well as the ability to ensure that those responsible for e-discovery, which ideally is not the IT team of course, have access to an appropriate system to manage their processes. So we'll take a look now at what's new in Office 365 to make this a viable option. Microsoft have been busy this last couple of years, and along with getting security and privacy certifications relevant to pretty much every industry, including the heavily regulated ones like government and finance, Microsoft have implemented advanced data loss prevention controls. They've also evolved Office 365 to meet the information governance and e-discovery demands of enterprise email customers. A new addition is the Compliance Centre, a dashboard designed to enable non-technical staff to manage compliance-related activities, which up until now is an area that really the third-party cloud vendors have really monopolised. The recent acquisition of an Azure-based early case assessment tool will also appeal to enterprises seeking to reduce the challenges of preparing for litigation in-house. There are also some key compliance data retention services added to Office 365 recently, which include preservation of vital metadata such as distribution list recipients, and preservation of user information for e-discovery when you place mailboxes on in-place hold, i.e. ensuring that even where users delete stuff, you still have a record of every email sent, including all the BCC'd recipients. Now, on top of that, they've added indefinite storage of inactive mailboxes, so really sort of copying what the journal used to capture on-premise. And this is all vital functionality which effectively replaces what the journal gave you, and Luke will be exploring this more in a bit. So we now know that Office 365 can capture and indefinitely retain what you need going forward. So in order to have a true single system and repository to manage, you need to look at migrating your legacy journal archive into the cloud. And in order to do this, there's quite a few things more that you need to ensure are done correctly. And we will be discussing this later in the presentation. First, I'm just going to hand over to Luke to remind us how Exchange journaling worked versus how Office 365 handles that data.
Thanks very much, Claire. So let's just quickly refresh on how journaling currently works in an on-prem Exchange environment. So when a user clicks on a message, the email passes through the MTA, which sends a copy to each named recipient, stripping out the BCC information for anyone who wasn't blind copied. At this point, the journal agent creates a fully compliant copy of the email and writes it into the journal mailbox. Now, this mailbox will hold the fully compliant version of all messages sent and received, both internally and externally. So, if we examine the headers of the recipient's message and compare them to the journal version, we can see here that the journal message has preserved the BCC information along with the members of the distribution list at the time the message was sent. Now, this is critical because obviously distribution lists are dynamic. So you can't simply check who's on the distribution list today, as that may have changed or that distribution list may no longer exist. The journal record is written to one or more journal mailboxes, and naturally, because they contain a separate copy of every message sent and received, they can grow in size quite rapidly. Now, because of this, almost all organisations with a requirement to retain a journal will implement a third-party archive of some form or another to manage the growth more efficiently. They also tend to add a layer of additional security, and they can also improve the search and discovery capabilities. To further add complexity to this matter, each email archive vendor tends to handle the journal metadata or the P1 header information in slightly different ways. So some may strip that data out and hold it into a separate part of the archive. Some might hold it with the message metadata. And to fully understand how this will affect the migration into Office 365, we'll take a quick look at Office 365's approach to capturing and retaining compliant messages. Until recently, Office 365 didn't have a functionally equivalent service to that of a journal mailbox. So, as Claire said, for the last couple of years, we've helped our customers restore archives back to an on-premise exchange, or more often, migrated those archives into third-party cloud vendors. Now, the concept of a shared mailbox doesn't exist in Office 365. So the ability to have a single mailbox containing all of the compliant data for all of your users simply doesn't exist. However, you can achieve the same compliance outcome of a traditional journal service in Office 365 by placing a mailbox on in-place hold. Now this writes a fully compliant copy of every message sent and received to a hidden subfolder within a user's mailbox. Messages written here can't be deleted by users and contain the fully expanded distribution list data, but no BCC info. Only the sender's copy of a message contains the BCC information for security. All metadata is fully discoverable under Office 365 search for anyone with the necessary privileges. So in-place hold and litigation hold allow you to preserve mailbox content to meet regulatory compliance and e-discovery requirements. So we've established that if you have a compliant journal archive and you want to migrate it into 365, you simply can't migrate the data from your user archive mailboxes. Nor can you take a single compliant journal mailbox and migrate it into a single Office 365 mailbox because we can't have shared mailboxes. So what do? We effectively need to convert the single instanced on-prem journal archive back into the multi-instance format for Office 365. But we also need to ensure that each message is presented to Office 365 in a format where the compliant metadata will be fully discoverable. And this is where a specialist migration solution like Transalt can be absolutely invaluable. We've looked at how Office 365 differs from traditional Exchange journaling, and it's clear that the two have very different methodologies at play. This means that there are a number of things which need to happen in order to convert a legacy journal archive and make it safely into Office 365. For example, your journal archive will include emails sent to and from users no longer working for the organisation. Now, the Office 365 model requires you to provision a mailbox for each user, whether or not they're a live user or a leaver. Now, this may be alarming for some enterprises who may have 2, 3, 4 times as many leavers as they do live users. And the good news, though, is that once all items for a leaver have been migrated into Office 365, you can place that mailbox on in-place hold, and then you can recycle that CAL after 30 days. The challenge here is structuring the migration plan in line with the amount of Office 365 CALs that you own, so that you don't impinge on your live migration strategy and delay the adoption to the cloud. Now, this is something we help customers to work out, and in fact is something we're doing right now for a large construction company. There may be archives that aren't to be accessible by end users, but you still need them to be preserved and searchable to authorized personnel. So, for example, this could be items that have been deleted by users yet remain in your archive. To preserve these items in the correct way, you'll need to migrate them into a special hidden subfolder within the Recoverable Items folder, or the RIF. It's important to note that there's a RIF associated with both the primary mailbox and the in-place archive for each user. So you should check with your chosen migration method supports the direct migration into either of those as required. Now, if one or more legal cases are running during the time of your planned migration, it's imperative that any ring-fenced datasets are preserved and that the legal hold status is maintained once transferred into the new system. Likewise, If you have any existing retention policies, you may wish to map these into the equivalent retention tags when you migrate this data into Office 365. A chain of custody is a big one. So, any time that you're moving an electronic record between storage devices or subsystems, there's the potential for failure or disruption that introduces the risk of deletion, alteration, or substitution. And it's this risk that can compromise the integrity and the reliability of evidential material produced in the event of a legal dispute. So in technical terms, chain of custody can be strengthened by minimizing the number of conversions or interim stages during a migration. This means that ideally, you'll want to look for a migration route that moves your data directly from your on-prem repository into Office 365 in one audited end-to-end transaction. Now, if the available bandwidth for the cloud or the amount of data to be transferred means that the direct approach isn't possible, you can migrate data using an Azure-based transfer or the drive shipping, but this will use interim files, and it's important to be aware that this then becomes a multi-step migration, and it may compromise the chain of custody without the appropriate security and checks in place. But regardless of the approach taken, it's vital that you're able to prove that all the relevant evidence has remained unchanged, that all data has been successfully tracked through to receipt by the next stage or the next custodian. So, for example, you could use detailed transaction records, which would include a timestamp and the unique message ID in both the source and destination. And finally, that all migrated data has been fully accounted for at all stages. And having these assurances gives complete peace of mind to business stakeholders as they hand over mission-critical data to a third-party service. A lot can happen over the lifespan of an archive. Indexes and storage devices can get corrupted. You may apply a buggy update, or foreign data could be imported from different systems, etc., etc. And as a result, it's not unusual for emails to become corrupt and fail to migrate. And you'll want to perform baseline checks to test that all items can be correctly searched and opened as they're migrated, and that you're not just moving corrupt email and corrupt attachments from your source into Office 365 in a completely unusable format. If an email is damaged beyond repair, part or all of it still may be recoverable, and this is something that Ascension and Transvault have assisted customers with in the past. So we've helped reconstruct objects with whatever information is salvageable to prove that every attempt to recover those messages has been made. If you don't yet have a formal retention policy for email or other content, then migrating to Office 365 could be the perfect opportunity to implement one. And whichever policy you set, it should be implemented with consistency to ensure that the business has a clearly defined and well-established justification for the deletion of any data. And it's something we're going to be covering off in a later event.
Thanks for that, Luke. There's been a lot of information today so far. I hope you're still with us. So how do you go about planning your migration? Well, the long answer would take a while, but the short answer is to engage partners and solutions which can help you plan your overall legacy archive strategy to meet your particular goals. As I mentioned at the outset, we use a combination of software and many years of archive experience to make sure it all happens smoothly, and we're already working with customers doing exactly this kind of project. We are migration specialists, and we help organisations scope and map out the best approach, test it and deliver the archive migration in whichever way suits. For example, we have customers who prefer us to handle everything, and others who prefer to understand it and deliver their own migration or have another partner deliver it on their behalf. Either way, with over 120 migrations, many of which are to the cloud, under our belts, we've learned how to do this well and how to leverage the knowledge to help customers. We'd also strongly recommend finding a good Office 365 partner. You do need good support from Microsoft, and a partner who knows their stuff can be invaluable, particularly with planning things like licensing and CALs, which Luke touched on earlier. We've worked with many different partners, including Mint Tulip, .NET Solutions, Content and Code, and Core, as well as some of the integrators like EMC, Avanade, and Fujitsu, though this is just a list off the top of my head and is no means the total. Of course, the other half of the battle with migration projects like these is choosing the right solution. Transvault is the most experienced vendor in this space, with petabytes of data already migrated. I mean, much of it is already into the cloud, and they work very closely with Microsoft to understand new developments in Office 365 in order to constantly improve how the migration occurs. Microsoft recently announced at Ignite that Transvault were one of the first service vendors enabled to help bulk shift legacy archive PSD data into Office 365. Plus, Transvault have just announced today the release of the new CloudStream ingestion process, designed to significantly speed up direct bulk upload to Office 365, which should make life a lot easier. In addition, the software now has enhanced capability to map Enterprise Vault and legacy EAS journal archives from Exchange to Office 365, meaning it not only migrates the messages to the right place, but also ensures that legacy Exchange journals are mapped to the new Office 365 methodology, taking care of all the challenges Luke's explored today. We're nearly out of time, so I'll just finish with a whistle-stop overview of how a migration project for a journal archive might work as an example. There are so many variables involved with any migration, but here's a top-level view on how you might go about migrating user and journal archives into Office 365. The foundation of any project is the planning phase. So before starting a migration, the business and stakeholders need to take time to review legacy data and make some decisions on what you want to be put into Office 365, because this can have a huge impact on the wider project. Once there's an idea of the desired outcome, Essential will typically work with a team to guide the business through a detailed planning workshop to review all the variables and requirements from the migration. And once that plan is agreed, software is installed and configured, and a period of testing would take place to ensure the best possible performance is achieved and to ensure customer confidence all round before proceeding. And then once all of that testing has been completed, with a journal migration, we would typically expect to migrate the lever data first in batches. This is to ensure that Office 365 licenses are always available. Once lever data has been migrated, those mailboxes disabled and put on in-place hold, the user migration can begin because the cows will be freed up. For the live user migration, we perform 2 concurrent migrations to deliver the journal message that corresponds to each user into the recoverable item folder, the RIF that Luke mentioned earlier, within the personal archive for e-discovery purposes, and then at the same time the user mailbox data, usually where a shortcut exists at the moment in Exchange, into the primary mailbox, so that a user will see what they expect to see and the journal information goes into the right place for e-discovery. Throughout the process, Transvault tracks each transaction and provides a chain of custody report for your teams to review and to have on record for compliance assurance. Every project is different, but that's a brief overview of a typical process currently underway with some of our customers. And something we are offering to webinar attendees is a free planning session with one of our technical specialists. It's something that can come in handy even if you're in really the earliest of planning stages, just to understand some of the variables involved. This brings me to the end of today's session. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been useful. We've listed here a few articles which you might find interesting, a case study about Capita's approach, and as I mentioned just now, a link to request a free planning workshop with one of our technical team. Just complete a short form and someone will be in touch to arrange a time to chat. If you have any further questions about anything we've discussed today, please don't hesitate to get in touch, either by Twitter, email, or give us a call. We are planning some further webinars throughout the summer and autumn around this subject, and we will keep you posted on the dates. Thank you again for your time. Take care.